I do have 2 or 3 questions. First, you're seeking educational diversity, as I understand it, at Harvard. But my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, is that you don't ask about religion and why the disparate treatment of religion and race. Why would evangelical Christians, Catholics, Muslims add to the educational diversity at Harvard and other religious groups? Added the diversity, and why not ask about that?
So Harvard greatly values religious diversity. It is extraordinarily proud of the religious diversity.
How can it track it if it doesn't ask about it?
Oh, how can it track it?
How can it track it in the admissions process may happen by happenstance? I'll let you finish.
Okay, Harvard is not tracking it in the admissions process other than to the extent that, and many students indicate what their religion is. Harvard has not thought it necessary, and so far as I know, nobody has suggested that Harvard has any need to provide a tip for religious diversity because the Harvard undergraduate population is so religiously diverse. There are currently 47 chaplains.
That answers my question.
Yeah.
Okay.
I just want to say that our ministry ministers to 27 different religious denominations.
Right. It was a factual question. Second, I think you agree that the baseline in our precedents, operating within the confines of our precedents, as you want us to do, is race neutrality. And we've allowed, though, limited consideration of race in educational and higher educational admissions. As you've heard, 2 limits on that, as I understand it. 1, the adequate race-neutral alternatives. 2, the durational limits, the 25 years or whatever durational limit you think works there. I just want to make sure you agree with how I set that up. In other words, race neutrality is the baseline. There are 2 limits on the consideration of race-conscious educational admissions at colleges and universities. Adequate race-neutral alternatives would be 1. A durational limit, 25 or something else, would be the other. Is that how you read our precedents?
I read your precedent in that. I think you have other requirements too, which is it has to be flexible, it has to be one factor among many, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
But I agree with your 2 categorizations, except that with respect to the durational requirements, we understand it to be inconsistent with the language from Justice O'Connor's opinion that I quoted the court, which is that the narrow tailoring requirement and the race-neutral alternative requirement, strictly, scrupulously, and skeptically applied, will tell us when race-neutral alternative.
Okay, and one last one. This picks up on Justice Kagan's and Justice Gorsuch's questions, I believe. But on the adequate race-neutral alternatives question, it seems that Harvard would have to sacrifice potentially something else to achieve what you think would be meaningful, sufficient racial diversity. And I think the questions, Justice Gorsuch, were, well, why don't you have to then sacrifice those something else's to achieve the, if you're going to otherwise use race-conscious means?
And there's no question that
in other words, I think that's a legal question we're going to have to ultimately figure out. Does a university have to sacrifice those other things or not?
And so what this court's precedents say, Bakke, Grutter, and Fisher are, of course, there are race-neutral alternatives that may require some sacrifices. A university is not required to sacrifice so much that it changes the essential character. I wish I had this court's own words, but I think that's the test, and that was certainly the test the district court applied.
That suffices, and you answered it. Thank you.
Thank you.